Hi, my name is Levi Knight, Youth Programme Coordinator for the Mighty Creatives, and you're listening to the Mighty Voices podcast, where we discuss topics that concern young people and the role creativity has in these challenges. And the episode's a bit different today. We're going to be talking about the role creativity has with the adolescent brain. And it's in line with World Mental Health Day. I'm joined by two special guests. We have...
So I'm Connor, former youth board member, now Youth Programme Coordinator at the Mighty Creatives.
And we also have...
I'm Jo Stockdale from Well Within Reach. I do a lot of training with TMC, with the creative mentors, and have also been very involved in the employers' work.
Thank you. Nice to have you both on the show. As a little icebreaker before we get started with the podcast, I wanted to ask, what book are you reading, or what piece of art have you seen, heard, or discovered in recent times that's had an impact on you? I'll start with you, Connor.
Yeah, so for me, it was recently I went to an event called Bad Betty Live, and there was a poet, Raymond Antrobus, who I'd not seen his work before and did a masterclass with him beforehand, and it was great. But then when he performed on the night, he actually read his children's book that he's published, and obviously I've not picked up a children's book in a while. So watching this established poet read a children's book and a crowd of adults actually resonating with it and understanding the deeper themes in that just really opened my eyes to what's out there.
I agree, and you know what it is? I've got quite a few. I say that like I've got like 14 or 15. I've got young children, and what I find when I read books to the youngest, there's quite a few adult themes within the books that are cloaked within the children's book, if that makes sense. So I definitely can see that. Nice, thank you for that, Connor. What about you, Jo?
Well, I was about to talk about a book, and then for some reason a theatre production that I saw recently popped into my head called Punch.
Okay.
Which is... I suppose it's popped into my head because it's very relevant to today's conversation, and it's a true story about a young man in Nottingham who was very involved in kind of gang kind of culture, and just went into Nottingham City one night looking for trouble, punched somebody in the face. It was one punch and it killed him.
Right.
And it follows the story of the young man who was killed, his parents actually looking for resolution through restorative justice rather than a custodial sentence. I mean, the guy did go to prison, but he actually followed the invite for restorative justice, and it opened up a completely new world for him. And this is really, really pertinent because it's based on a true story. This is what happened to him. And Jacob, I can't remember the second name, but Jacob was the perpetrator of the crime, and then went on to get a first degree in criminology. Right. And now works enormously, and is an enormously powerful voice in and source of influence in kind of youth crime and youth violence, which doesn't mitigate what he did. You know, he still killed a man. But it was a really, really powerful piece of theatre because it so many times, especially with youth crime, we're often led with the just lock them up and throw away the key, and this person is a bad person. And what was as well as the fact that a life could have been saved, it really made me think what was overlooked in that young man that was always capable of a first-class degree in criminology. 100%. So yeah, I think it may be because it was just a short run. But if it comes to, I think there's conversations about it now being developed for the West End stage. Right. So I highly recommend it.
It sounds very powerful because I got goosebumps on my face when you were saying that, because I think, he killed a man, and obviously we can't. You need to be punished for the act, I suppose. But I think with the look at restorative justice, I think it means so much, especially to young people, to know that someone believes in them believes that they can do better. Do you get what I mean?
Yes.
They're not being judged for the error in their life. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of the time people are judged on an error, and that it's hard to come back from an error sometimes. Do you get what I mean?
Well, what was really, what the production summed up really well was, without ever saying it, was the lack of empathy. It wasn't about being a bad person and wanting to hurt someone and wanting to kill someone. It was just about having absolutely no connection to the consequences.
Yeah.
Either to the person he attacked, because I think this was fairly common,
Right.
unfortunately, kind of fairly common behaviour, or the impact on the wider network and the family associated with that. There was just no connection at all. And obviously we'll go into this further as we go through the podcast. That lack of empathy and lack of its capacity to kind of foresee consequences and see the ripple effect, if you like. It's not to say all adolescents have got a brain capable of that, of course, but it's a call for wider understanding, I think.
Definitely. Thank you for that, Jo. I was going to share my book. Now I don't feel like mine's anything on your twos.
No, go for it, man.
I'm reading a book at the moment called Silent Patient. I can't remember the author. My friend passed it to me. He was in one of his trains got cancelled on the way home, so he shared a cab with two strangers he didn't know, and they were talking to him and suggested this book. So he got the book and thought I'd like the book. So I've started reading it. It's about, it starts off where there's a lady that started writing a diary, it seems like, in the prologue, and she's been accused of murdering her husband, but she hasn't said a word since. So she's in a psychiatric ward, and there's a person that wants to specifically go and work with her, so he's got a job at this psych ward to try and speak with her and find out what actually happened. So I've only just started it, but it's really good. I really want to know what happened, because I'm under the impression that she starts speaking about what's happened and she hasn't told anyone. So that intrigue, I've never felt that kind of intrigue before, because this isn't my kind of book. I like dragons and magic and elves and things like that. I'm not really into like a true crime book, so yeah, I'm nice. I'm enjoying it so far. Thursday the 10th of October is World Mental Health Day. I've got a bit of information that I want to share with you about this year's initiative. So, chosen through a global vote involving WFMH members, stakeholders and supporters, this year's theme, "It is time to prioritize mental health in the workplace," is a call to action that resonates worldwide. With over 2,000 participants from 116 countries, the selection process was truly inclusive, and the resulting theme reflects the awareness of an urgent need and profound opportunity. Mental health issues such as depression and anxiety are pervasive in workplaces globally, impacting productivity, attendance, and overall performance. When left untreated, the staggering economic cost is estimated at $1 trillion annually by the WHO. The COVID-19 pandemic pulled the curtain back on the dramatic need to address mental health issues in the workplace. Today, around the world, enlightened leaders strive to meet their duty of care, recognizing that addressing the mental health needs of their workforce is not only beneficial for individuals, but also for their healthy and high-performing organizations. World Mental Health Day 2024 will highlight various aspects of mental health at work, from workplace conditions and stress management to the importance of social inclusion and empowerment. The goal is clear: to champion mental health in the workplace and build best practices that create cultures where workers have the potential to contribute productively and thrive. For more information, visit World Mental Health Day, October the 10th, at wmhdofficial.com. Right, that was a bit of a mouthful, but I think it's important. I think the theme as well this year is quite important and relevant to what we're talking about with the adolescent brain, because I felt like it'd be good to have a conversation with regards to anybody working with young people, what should they be aware of, and things that they can try and understand and incorporate into their practices. So before we get started on that, I just wanted to ask, do you think creativity can play a role in managing mental health issues in the workplace? I'll start with you, Connor.
So I definitely think that it has a role to play, but I don't think it's the conventional role that people would see it as.
Okay.
And I think the word creativity most of the time gets associated with drawing and painting and the typical things you'd think of. But I think the way it needs to be looked at in the workplace is being innovative.
Yeah.
Is the better way to describe it. So just taking in the fact that I will have a different thought process to you, Levi, and a different thought process to you, Jo, and just realizing that having those is a benefit rather than a detriment. So going into those systems, and say I go into a workplace and they've had the same system for 20 years, it's the willingness to adapt that and take on the new ideas rather than just going, it's worked for X amount of years, let's keep doing it. So yeah, I definitely think creativity can have a role to play in giving people that voice and being innovative in the workplace, which then makes someone feel valued in the workplace, which will then massively help their mental health.
I think you make a really valuable point. In the last podcast episode that I recorded with Samantha from the Youth Board, we were speaking about creativity, and what creativity really is another word for problem solving. Do you get what I mean? So I think when you're speaking about the association with creativity being drawing or art or something like that, I get it, but there's also another side to problem solving, because sometimes it's a problem solving thing. Like for me, I make music, so when I write my lyrics, it's kind of like a problem solving thing. It's self-soothing, if that makes sense. I talk about things that might be bothering me on my mind through my lyrics, and although it's creativity, it's also problem solving as well. So yeah, I completely agree with that. Thanks for that. Have you got a view on that, Jo?
I have actually, and something that, just listening to Connor talking then, something that he said made this little quote pop into my head: if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got.
Yeah.
And I think that creativity is the antidote to that. And again, I kind of echo what Connor said about it's a lot of the potential in creativity is redefining what we think that is. And I think problem solving, I agree, that's part of it. And I think that the kind of the bigger pool of what is creativity in the workplace is doing things differently, thinking about things differently, approaching problems differently, and also potentially approaching problems as opportunities. Because as I'm talking, another thought comes into me, which is you won't find the solution by focusing on the problem. And I think so much, especially if there's a culture of we've always done it this way. We've got, and I think systems are very useful in some workplaces, but I think they can also be suffocating. If this is how we do things, this is how we've always done things, rather than, well, actually, if we're looking for change, where does change begin? You're not going to get change the outcome
100%.
if you don't. It's a bit like, I use this analogy quite a lot in my training, and sorry if this is a bit long-winded, but and I guess this is my own creative thought process. It's a bit like, right, well, here's a chocolate cake. We've baked this lovely chocolate cake, and we want it to look like this and taste like this. Well, then you need what's the ingredients for that? And it's not just what's the ingredients, it's what's the cooking process, what's your methodology. All of the component parts need looking at. And I think so often workplaces are stuck with, this is the outcome
100%.
we want, like the chocolate cake or whatever, but without really understanding, well, what's the input, not just what's the output, because it's the correlation between the two. And so much problem-focused attention rather than actually what's the strengths
100%.
that we can focus on.
Because what you'll find as well with organisations, they do what works. So it's not, if say they come out of the gate and it works straight away, they're not going to change something that isn't working a lot of the time, especially if it's successful. Whereas I think it needs to be, if innovation and creativity is going to be within the organisation, it needs to come top down. So for example, TMC, very creative, and it comes top down. And like when I first started, when I was being shown processes with the trackers and things like that, it was always said, if you can see something that works, please let us know, because we will change it to if it makes sense. Do you get what I mean? And that gives you, as an employee, it's so empowering, because it's like, okay, I have a voice. You're appreciated for your individuality and what you can bring to the whole.
Yes.
So definitely think there is a place for it, and I think you both make valid points on that.
I think just to go off the back of that as well, before moving to TMC, the organisation I worked for before, I had pretty much no responsibility in my role whatsoever. It was, here's a system that management have put in place. Management haven't worked on ground level. Everyone can tell that the system is not going to work, but it gets implemented anyway. And then any feedback just fell on deaf ears. And it put me and a lot of other people I was working with, because we were quite a young team, in the mindset of, well, we're not meant to have responsibility and no one's going to care about the work we're doing as long as it's done their way. So this is how it works. And then moving to TMC, it took me quite a while to get out of that mindset of being entrusted with tasks and then me going, I would never have had this before. This isn't something that I'm capable of. And I think it's looking at, just because you move into a place that knows how to do it right, the lasting effect of being in an environment where that's not appreciated can actually be a lot to work on and can pose other problems beyond the point of just getting out of that environment.
And that's what I wanted to ask. I was going to say, that process where you were saying where you was working before, do you think that process had an effect on you personally as a person?
Hugely. I used to sit at my desk, and by about Wednesday afternoon, there was nothing else to do for the rest of the week. And it got to a stage where I felt really low, because I was like, well, I'm coming to this place 5 days a week, and I feel like half of that is me sitting here just wasting the hours of my day. So I genuinely hit a point where I was like, I feel like my days are completely pointless. But then it felt so draining just sitting there doing nothing, to the point where outside of work, I then wasn't doing anything, because I was like, well, today's just been terrible because I've just wasted my time doing that. So the knock-on effect that it had was felt for quite a while. Like, I dropped off of doing football, I dropped off of the poetry scene for a while, and it was just that simple thing of work has become meaningless, so it's now draining me.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. And would you say there's a different... you know what it is? TMC haven't asked me to ask these questions. I'm just going off what you're saying, kind of. But would you say there's a difference now with having responsibility and the things that you do now that has an impact in your person?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think it's just a very human thing to want to be appreciated.
Yeah.
So coming into TMC and being entrusted with these things, I've gone, okay, well, they've put this faith in me, and I'm going to see if I can return this faith. And the boost it's given me in self-confidence of being like, oh no, I know what I'm doing and can be trusted with projects and with budgets. And I'm like, yeah, I have actually successfully completed these things and it's gone well. And then that has pushed me in my personal life where, again, I got back to playing football and wanted to work harder at that. I got back on the poetry scene and have started performing a lot more and working on getting something ready to publish. And it is just that knock-on thing of, okay, this has purpose and meaning, and I feel like I am driving forward in this part of my life. So the ethic that that's given me and the belief that's given me, I've gone, okay, well, if I can do that, which I didn't think I could do, why can't I go and do this as well?
Yeah, completely understand that. Really appreciate you sharing that, because I know where you're coming from, because I used to work in a warehouse, and every day I would get up and I'd just be dread going to work, and the last thing you want to do is dread going to work. Do you get what I mean? Like, it's so draining. It's not necessarily the work you're doing that drains you, it's that mental, that dread and things like that. And then once I left there and found somewhere that gave me responsibility and valued me as an individual, and they said good morning and see you later, and like, did you have a nice evening, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
It does the most for you as a person, because you want to do for that company. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think the knock-on effect from wanting to do for the company, you want to do for yourself, because you can see that it's achievable. You can actually see it. So thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. Going on to the next part, I wanted to speak about the adolescent brain, because like you said, Joe, it's got a massive relevance to World Mental Health Day's initiative, especially with being in the workplace. So I've got a few points that I've jotted down that I just wanted to talk to you about, because I feel like it's such a vast topic. I don't want to say, Joe, can you tell us about the adolescent brain? It's like, where do we start? Do you get what I mean? So I've got a few points that I wanted to just speak to you and just hopefully see if you could expand on. So what we're doing with this session is creating something for people that work with young people to be aware of. So if they are working with an adolescent brain, we've got a few key points and a bit of information that can help understand it further and maybe be able to incorporate some of these things into your daily work practices. So the first thing I wanted to speak to you about, Joe, was brain development within an adolescent brain. So I've got some information here that says the brain continues to develop until a person's mid-20s.
And beyond, yeah.
And beyond. Yeah. Different parts of the brain grow at different rates. Mm-hmm. Are you able to elaborate on that, just to hopefully give some insight to anybody that does work with a young person?
Sure. Okay, well, the first thing I would say is that the brain never stops developing and changing. It's right until the very end of life. It's busy and reconfiguring and rewiring itself, but there is a very significant window of time during adolescence, which most of us, without understanding the adolescent brain, thinking of adolescence as something like 12 to 18, 12 to 19. But from a brain development perspective, the brain doesn't mature until between the ages of 25 and 31. So there's still a huge amount of work that is going on in the brain at that time. And it's a double-edged sword, because if you think about it, the brain that goes into adolescence is very, very different from the brain that comes out of adolescence. You're basically being cared for by, parents or, a wider network when you go into adolescence. And when you come out of adolescence, you are biologically capable, and maybe long before you come out of adolescence, you're biologically capable of producing your own offspring and being a responsible adult. That's what Mother Nature intended anyway. And so in order for the brain to develop not just new skills, but whole different ways of thinking, of looking at the world, of interpreting information, the brain has to grow a huge amount, and I'm talking physical matter. The brain has to grow an awful lot of new dendrites. That's the kind of connections between brain cells. And in order to do that, the brain is, the skull is fixed long before a brain reaches adolescence. So in order to make way for that new growth, that new physical growth, it goes through a process called pruning, which is basically where we physically lose brain areas of the brain to make way for new growth. So this is where we get this simultaneous loss of skills and loss of competence, while the brain is also growing and developing and changing rapidly. A lot of the difficulty we have with adolescence is that we focus on the loss, because that becomes more evident. We have behaviour that might be seen as more risk-taking. And from an adolescent's perspective, that doesn't necessarily feel like risk-taking. That's just like living a life that feels fulfilling. We see difficulties planning ahead or anticipating consequences, so being very reactive and impulsive in the moment. And so there's a whole lot of misunderstanding around the life of the adolescent, that they're lazy. Actually, there's a whole change in sleep patterns.
Yeah.
That they're demotivated. And yes, there's certainly, and I think kind of what I was thinking about when Connor was talking about his experience in the workplace, motivation, how easy it is to become demotivated during adolescence if the environment isn't right. And very often the environment isn't right. A typical secondary school, the environment works so against the way a typical adolescent brain is working. But my point is that we focus so much on the deficits and trying to do to young brains what they're actually not neurobiologically capable of doing. And we actually miss the truth that the brain during adolescence is growing more dendrites, making more neural connections, and is a more efficient learner than it ever will be again in life.
Yeah.
And we just don't see that in a typical adolescent. But that's because the environment around a typical adolescent isn't conducive to unlocking what's going on in their brains and maximising the amount of learning capacity that is actually available if we create the right environment. And a lot of those environments are to do with the quality of relationships.
Right, yeah. Very interesting. It's so interesting. You know, the fact that the brain is continually pruning. That's what's interesting to me, the pruning. I wanted to ask, when does the brain start pruning? Is it when it reaches adolescence, or is it forever pruning?
It's always pruning to an extent, and that basically is the brain's way of being as efficient as possible. So actually the first major period of pruning in a child's life is around between the ages of kind of 18 months to 3 years old.
Right.
And so what we end up with is a repeat of that process during adolescence.
Okay.
And what the process I'm referring to is a huge overgrowth of dendrites, i.e. when a baby's born, it's born with somewhere between 86 billion and 100 billion brain cells. The jury's out on how many. I don't know who counted them, but 86 billion was well documented until very recently. Now neuroscientists are saying that the average brain has nearer to 100 billion brain cells. And each of those brain cells, on average, is capable of growing up to 40,000 dendrites, which are the little tendrils that go off in search of a connection with another brain cell. And when two dendrites or axons connect, that's where we make a synaptic connection, and that's learning.
Right.
So if you think about it, 86 billion times 40,000 on average, it's an astounding number of connections that the brain is capable of making. And obviously when a baby arrives into the world, and on the premise that they are provided with an enriching, stimulating environment from a sensory, social and emotional perspective, the brain responds by making huge amounts of neural connections.
Right.
So by the time they get to about 2 years old, it's like spaghetti junction in their brain. So it kind of starts to make sense of the terrible twos, because there's basically too many neural pathways for information to travel effectively.
I actually have a 2.5-year-old right now, and I can vouch for this information right now.
Completely. So between the ages of kind of 2 and 4, the brain typically goes through a period of pruning, which is the neural pathways or connections that are lesser used kind of prune away. And so the ones that are more effective, the neural pathways that child is going to need to use to navigate the world more effectively, are the ones that remain in place. And so it basically becomes more efficient in there.
Yeah.
And that process is repeated again with the onset of adolescent hormones, basically repeats that process during adolescence.
Right.
So what we tend to have is young people who have ideally learned lots of skills and competencies and have acquired lots of knowledge, but as they move into adolescence, there is a regression of many of those skills, particularly the ones that are processed by a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex.
Okay.
And that's things like empathy and delayed gratification, i.e. waiting for a reward, understanding social cues, impulse control, being able to have a thought and not necessarily act on it. And so because we may have seen these children exhibit and use these skills in a very sophisticated fashion earlier on in childhood, the perception is often that they're just choosing not to use those skills, they're making bad decisions. But actually the capacity for decision making and problem solving and anticipating consequence it sits in that part of the brain that's basically under reconstruction for quite a period of time.
Makes so much sense, yeah. Really does, because it's like, even with my oldest at high school, year 9, very rebellious at the moment, and you're thinking, why are you like this? You wasn't like this when you were younger. You know, when you was growing up, you were doing these things with ease, and it's just kind of like, it makes sense if it's under construction. Yeah. And then when I think back to my own childhood, I remember being very rebellious in my teens, like very rebellious, like an arrogance of youth. Do you get what I mean? So it makes so much sense.
It does, but we get locked in with the body only goes in one trajectory. And so as physically, the body doesn't just get taller, there's all kinds of physical changes that we say, this person is maturing, they're becoming an adult. And so it's very easy to expect, this person should emotionally and socially and cognitively be maturing at the same rate, but the brain does not work in the same way at all.
Yeah.
Like I said, we kind of tend to focus on the regression and what's going wrong, and I use that term loosely because nothing's going wrong, actually. It's just working how Mother Nature intended. But like I said, the concern for me, I guess, and for lots of us who are working with young people, especially more vulnerable young people, is that we're not focused on the strengths. All the attention goes on to the deficits, what's wrong, what you need to do more of, what you're not doing good enough of. And that's when I get very concerned about these punitive approaches that are used increasingly in secondary schools. And again, I'm referring to the story Connor told about when the environment isn't conducive to do your best and grow and challenge yourself and permission to fail, demotivation, depression, lethargy set in very, very quickly. And getting out of that, especially because biochemically there are vulnerabilities to becoming depressed and anxious during adolescence anyway. For some young people, that could be a lethal cocktail of lots of negative messages, not being able to find their place and fit in and belong, which is the urge to belong and fit in during adolescence is incredibly powerful. And it leads so many young people to behave in ways that I'm not condoning, a lot of things that they might do. I'm particularly aware that we're hearing a lot about youth criminality at the moment, but there is also a huge lack of understanding about a young person doesn't just do something bad because they have decided to do something bad, but there's all kinds of reasons why, from a young person's perspective, may not have even been aware of making a decision, because the decision-making part of their brain, the logical, rational part of their brain, is not very strong at that time.
100%. So it's like anybody working with young people, it's a matter of creating a safe space for that young person to just express, if that makes sense, to explore what they're feeling and what they're thinking without the punitive measures. Do you get what I mean? So it's like, imagine in the workplace, you could say things like one-to-ones, checking in, and then being aware of the skills of the young person that might be in the workplace or you're working with. So then you're able to feed those skills back to the young person.
Yeah, and amplify them. We've all been in that situation where somebody notices we're good at something and gives us more of it, and it grows and it flourishes. That's exactly what you were talking about, Con.
Absolutely.
If you focus on, I kind of live by the belief that you get more of what you focus on. So if you focus on what's going wrong, what's going badly, you reinforce that message. If a young person is constantly getting the message, you are naughty, you are bad, you are not welcome, you go to exclusion, that's what, in terms of the identity that young person is going to develop and strengthen, that's what you'll reinforce. I am bad, so is there any point in trying to be good? I'm not wanted, so is there any point in trying to find belonging? I'll end up in exclusion, so why not behave like that? And we're surrounded by a generation of adults beyond us who have lived a life far less than they are capable of, because they are living to the beliefs that somebody gave them in childhood or adolescence that are false. And this is where I come back to that story I was talking about with Punch, actually. There's so many people like that across the world, not just in this country, who are living well below their potential because they've developed an identity based on what is wrong with you and not what is right with you.
Yeah, there's definitely...
What's the matter with you rather than what matters to you.
Yeah, and I think... There's a couple of things to highlight there where, like you say, going back to school and the people working with these young people, it's like, I'm only 23, so this isn't that big a statement for me, but I remember the teachers that put time and effort into me, and I appreciate what they've done, and I wouldn't be in the position I'm in had they not done that. Like my English teacher, who did not need to do this at all when I started writing poetry, but after lessons, he would sit with me and just give me feedback on my poems as if they were like in the GCSE curriculum. And I was like, as a kid, I was like, this is awful. He's just criticizing my work. But the amount of times he also gave me praise And they were the bits I went, this person knows their stuff and is investing that time into me and telling me that I can be really good at this, so I'm going to keep doing it. And now I've been writing like 9 years, and it's been an amazing thing to do. But I think there are a lot of people that don't get that input. And again, growing up where I grew up, there's very few routes that people take in life, is the way I'll put it. But then at the same time, if anyone from that background then becomes successful, it's not this case of, oh, how have they gone and done that? Everyone is like, we are proud of you for doing that. And it shows people that there is this other route that they can take. And it's just a case of them being able to realize that hopefully earlier on and having that faith instilled in them, rather than, like you say, this mindset of, I'm not good at this, I can't do that, so I'm going to take this route that is the only one that's viable for me.
Absolutely. And to add to what you guys are saying, I think positive reinforcement is massive. Like, as a father, I've got young children, do you get what I mean? They range from 2.5 to 14 this year, do you get what I mean? So you can see that actually the proof is in the pudding with positive reinforcement. For example, when my youngest was being potty trained, like, she can use the toilet now. Like, when she was being potty trained, every time she used the toilet, it's like, well done, you're a good girl. Do you get what I mean? And she loved that. You could see it in her face that she really loved that, and she couldn't wait to get another round of applause. Do you get what I mean? And I think, as humans, we all love a pat on the back. All of us loved, you've done a good job. Everybody loves to hear that. Do you get what I mean? And it carries you, something so small can carry you so far. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like you said, you was inspired from something small, something, it wasn't small to you, and it's not small, but what I'm saying is, in terms of the grand scheme of things, it was a small piece of time and effort that that person put in with you, where now you're writing for 9 years. So
yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things to go off from that as well is the fact that it can be as simple, like you say, as going, well done for that. But I think when you get someone that's grown up in an environment where praise isn't common, there then becomes this thing of praise almost becomes the thing they're uncomfortable with. And
it can be very unpalatable.
Yeah, so then it becomes this point of going, well, because for the longest time I couldn't accept praise. Yeah. And it made me feel really uncomfortable when people were praising me. And I did prefer it when someone came up and actually gave me a critique on, you could be doing this better, or you could be doing that better. And again, as I was saying earlier, with working in one place that had an atmosphere that was not productive compared to working at TMC now, it takes a while to unlearn that behavior. And I think it can be a case of people not realizing the fact that, like say, going into the workplace, if a young person's had this experience, there's a way of working with them. Whereas a lot of people tend to go into a mindset of, this is how I work, and this is how I will project that onto other people. And the best teams are teams that go, okay, let's try and figure out how everyone works and actually move this forward together.
100%. And I think it's having the trust to believe the compliment. Like, for me, when you say that, it really resonates with me, because there was a time where I didn't believe people when they complimented me, you're good. And like, when your friends big you up for something, it's like, yeah, but you're my friends, you've got to. Yeah. Or if your mum says you're good, so yeah, but you're my mum, you've got to. Do you get what I mean? So it was really hard to accept that. But it just takes time. And I think when you're around the right environment, like we talk about the environment, and there's a trust with the person that's feeding that information to you, it does wonders. Do you get what I mean? So yeah.
I'm going to chuck something in there as a bit of a devil's advocate, because I was listening to a TED talk by Carol Dweck last week, and Carol Dweck is her big subject is growth mindset. All right. Which is the kind of the belief that the skills and attributes that you have aren't fixed. And one of her kind of research findings is, I guess, the danger of overpraising, because she referenced, I'm sure it was this talk, but she was talking about unless I've got this wrong and now I'm thinking of something else, about the number of people who come into the workplace, young people that now come into the workplace and feel the need to be rewarded or praised constantly. And Carol Dweck's mindset, which is based in a lot of research, basically found that there is a huge amount of value to be recognising effort rather than achievement.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying only recognise effort, because sometimes, especially when, I've done the whole toilet training thing, what we're talking about there, whatever that is a dopamine hit. You get a little dopamine hit, you get a bit of feel good. But a lot of positive feedback is not necessarily getting praise. That may be part of it, but it's actually about somebody saying, I'm paying attention to you.
100%.
And I'm observing you, and you matter enough for me to notice.
I agree with that, Joe. Because at first I was thinking, where are you going with this?
Yeah,
when you
same.
said devil's advocate, I was thinking, I don't agree already. But now you've explained it, I do, because my other daughter plays football on Sunday mornings, and I really believe it's all about praising effort rather than the success in... quotation, like the reward for something that you've achieved, because you're not always going to achieve, but if you put the effort in, there's no reason for you can't be praised for the effort. So the young girls, when they're playing, it's like they may go for a challenge or chase the ball and they may not get it, but it's well done, that's good effort, good pressing the ball there, you press the ball well,
because we have to be. And this comes back to that very first conversation we were having about creativity in the workplace, permission to fail, and feeling like it's okay to fail, it's okay to not do your best, it's okay to not be the best. Because I think, again, we've got this real competitive thing, and social media has added so much to it, is that we're always comparing ourselves to other people.
Making my face tingle again, Joe, because you're saying the truth, because I really, really think... And it's funny because I was at football yesterday and I was watching them and they played really well. Like last week, they got absolutely hammered by another team, but they're normally winning, but they got really beat last week. And then this week they came back and won, but the bounce back and to see the way their development was just really nice. And I think it goes into what you say. I've only seen what's happened is they get praised for the effort.
Yes.
It's not, even when they win, it's not about the fact that they won the game. It's the effort that they've played together. They've played together. They're a team, and they've got everyone isn't at the same level, and that's what makes it such a great team, because you've got some that are really good, some that are all right, and some that are coming up. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
But as a team, they're a great team together, and I think that's come about. Shout outs to Ash, the coach. I see you doing a really good job. I think it's down to the coach really praising the effort of the girls.
Yes.
Do you get what I mean?
Yeah,
it's the
totally.
effort rather than you've won this game or you've done this.
Yeah.
They get praised for that, but it's more about the effort. So I'm with you.
I think as well, like when you're looking at a setup like that, like you say, there are players at varying levels, and like you say, with social media, there's this culture of competitiveness. But if you just bring community and unity into that, it's like, again, I play football, and the team that wins the league isn't the team that's technically the best. It's the team that have grafted and they've worked together for the last 8-9 years, and they know each other, they know how to work to each other's strengths and weaknesses. And then, like you say, they've got that chemistry, and it is about, we're going to do what we can within our capacity. It doesn't have to be everyone needs to be the next best thing. It's, okay, everyone is going to be part of this. And like you say, that's the thing. It's not about achieving it. It's about everyone mattering in that space.
Some of all parts. Yeah, definitely. I think, it's a very valid point. And it's kind of like a penny dropping right now, because I think it's a really important point about it's praising the effort.
Yeah.
It's praising the effort, because once you praise the effort, then you create a resilience and a motivation, and they don't need to be after a while. They don't need to be praised for the effort, because they believe in the effort that they put in.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Well, it's so easy to be defeated, especially if you're surrounded by people who you're seeing are better than you. Oh, I can't do this. I'm not good enough. I'm going to throw in my shout out as to the power of yet.
Yeah.
This is a really, really simple kind of technique of when a child or an adult says, I can't do it, no, you can't do it yet.
Yeah.
And it's not saying, oh, yes, you can. Because I'm really not a big fan of this whole sugarcoating kind of culture that we have, of when people have problems, we say, well, let's look on the positive, let's look on the sunny side. It's acknowledging the truth. No, you may not be able to do it, but you can't do it yet.
But that creates the connection with the young person.
Yeah, and while you're expressing belief.
Do you know what I mean?
In them
So
as well.
within the youth work that I do, it's a level of honesty that they understand, because it goes back to what I was saying a minute ago about trust. It's hard to trust people when they praise you all the time. Like we've even had referrals at TMC where doesn't react well to praise. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's hard, but if you're speaking to a young person about, you can't do it yet, and you are struggling with that, but there's no reason why we can't work towards that. Do you get what I mean? And I think it keeps a level of reality, and it enhances the connection between you and that young person, because they know you're not here to rubbish on. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
So, thank you for that. Wow. There's a lot of information there.
We can get lost down a very deep
Definitely
rabbit hole.
can.
Yeah.
What I wanted to touch on, because I think is quite important, is stress. So the note I've made is, teens may respond differently to stress than adults, which can increase their risk of developing mental illnesses like anxiety and depression. Are you able to expand on that a bit for us, Jo, about stress and how the adolescent brain navigates and manages stress?
Yeah, and part of this is actually to do with all brains full stop, really, and that often we, through our own individual eyes, kind of go, oh, you're making a mountain out of a molehill, for example. You've all had that experience. You're just overreacting. The brain and the body's stress response is not concerned with accuracy, and it's not concerned with, obviously it's concerned with accuracy to a point, but our kind of most primitive stress response, which is the fight, flight, freeze response, is activated without cognitive control. So there's a little tiny organelle deep in the brain, all of our brains, called the amygdala, and that's basically filtering millions and millions of pieces of information every second, and deciding before information even gets into our kind of conscious awareness, am I safe or am I not safe? Is this something I need to react to? And so very often there are stresses in the environment which we may be completely unaware of that are activating our stress response. The area of the brain where the amygdala sits is called the limbic system, and it's a very primitive part of the brain, basically, where our more survival emotions like fear and anxiety and anger and things like that belong. And it's a very reactive part of the brain, so it stresses easily. We kind of have to remember that stress, from a neurobiological perspective, from an evolutionary perspective, stress is designed to keep us alive. It's designed to go, where is the threat in the environment that's going to get in the way of my survival? What's the best way to get out of the way? Is it fight, flight, freeze? That primitive reactive part of the brain is more reactive in the adolescent brain than in the kind of preteen brain or the post-adolescent brain, because the prefrontal cortex, that's kind of the brain's executive, if you like, is under construction. It's very weak. And so the survival brain, the primitive brain, does exactly what it says on the tin during that time. It says, well, if your capacity to problem solve and think rationally and make decisions isn't very strong during this time, don't worry, I will take care of things. That's basically what's happening. I will step in, and I'm a very blunt instrument. I'll often get it wrong, but being alive is more important than being right. And, that's all of our brains kind of function on that. And this primitive brain, this limbic system, is common through all mammalian species. In fact, it's often called the mammalian brain. Okay. So for this reason, and because it's just easier to understand than the complexities of human behaviour, if you think about a zebra, for example, and it's pootling along the Serengeti, and it's got a really big survival brain for obvious reasons, because it's living in, an environment with numerous species that might kill it and eat it for dinner. So if you think about it physically, A zebra has got a coat that is designed to keep it well camouflaged. It's got ears that swivel so it can be, listen to sounds all around. And it's got eyes on the side of its head, so it's much better primed than us as a human species for where is the threat in the environment. And their brain is the same. So it doesn't have a big thinking brain like us, because there isn't time for thinking and problem solving and wondering why the sky is blue, or what we're going to eat for dinner tonight, when you're primed to stay alive in that kind of environment. So if it's pootling along the Serengeti and it sees a lion before the lion sees a zebra, it's not going to stop and go, well, hang on, is this really a lion?
Is it going to get me?
Yeah. What do I think this lion looks hungry? It's just going to say either I fight, I go for the lion, probably not very likely unless the lion is coming for it. The zebra might fight back. I flee, I run, I get out of the way, or I freeze, which is don't draw any attention to myself and hope I don't get spotted and the danger will pass. All of our brains have that same capacity within them, but it's more active within the adolescent kind of window of time because the thinking, logical, rational brain is weaker. And so what we get from a behavioural perspective is more impulsivity, more reactivity, more anger, and I'll use that term loosely because we often interpret anger when actually it's just badly interpreted. It's badly expressed stress.
Right.
So very often, adolescents, we've all come across and probably all familiar with our own adolescent. Are you looking at me funny? We've all heard that, haven't we?
Yeah.
And actually, we tend to think of paranoia in human behaviour as a very negative emotion. But going back to the zebra, that's the brain that's in charge. Paranoia is actually incredibly useful.
Yeah.
It's hypervigilance. Where is the threat? Where is the danger? And that's where we get... So it's just things like looking out for when you're getting those kinds of... Who are you talking about? Were you talking about me? That kind of, who was that? What was that person saying? Where was that person going? That's kind of that paranoia kind of coming out. But in answer to your question, biochemically, the adolescent brain is more prone to depression because the kind of reward centre where we get most of our dopamine hits is upstairs in that kind of neocortex. That's the prefrontal cortex belongs to the neocortex.
And it's under construction.
And it's under construction, which is why we get this behaviour that looks like risk-taking. Right. Is because the excitation that a 5-year-old, for example, might get from whizzing down a helter-skelter, that's all the adolescent brain is looking for, excitation and sensation. But in adolescence, it's not going to cut it.
Yeah.
Which is why, theme parks and going on hideous rides that send them upside down in the dark.
Jo, you're giving me answers to my teenage years. 'Cause I'm thinking, you're right. It's like the most fun we had was something that would raise the adrenaline, and more often than not, it was a risk. It was risk-taking, like garden hopping or something like that when we was younger, or...
And it's not necessarily... Often we think of this as adrenaline seeking. Yes, there's a degree of that. Actually, most of it is dopamine seeking.
Right.
It's just, I want that kind of hit of feeling good.
Okay.
But it's, like I said, it can be a lethal combination when that feeling good also combines with, well, I have to find this place to belong, and I'm kind of hanging out with people who aren't very kind of healthy to me. And
are you able to expand on dopamine? Because I've heard the phrase a lot, and I don't really know...
What phrase?
Dopamine.
Well, dopamine is a neurotransmitter, which is, a hormone, basically. And our brain produces a lot of dopamine in response to experiences that feel rewarding. So I'm not talking about rewarding as in carrot dangling reward. I'm talking about that felt good. Yeah. So, for example, if you do exercise and you might go, oh my God, I'm not going out for a run, this is going to be awful. And within 2 minutes you're going, yes, I'm feeling good, because you get the dopamine
I'm there
flowing.
Literally right now.
Yeah, I was there yesterday. And so that's the kind of reward I'm feeling. It's that kind of a bit of a high. Not necessarily, dopamine can be too high, and that's associated with some psychiatric conditions. But we all need kind of a flow of dopamine, high levels of dopamine in our system, but adolescents struggle with it.
So, dopamine, is that something that we self-generate? So in terms of, where you're seeing the reward, like, the jog, for example, that's something we go and do and we generate. Is it possible for someone to give you, like, make a compliment and you feel dopamine?
Yeah, dopamine is a very social neurotransmitter as well. So we get dopamine through lots of different activities, through creative activity as well, I should add. Very, very high levels of dopamine through creative activity. But any kind of what I call pro-social interaction, so smiles, laughter. When you were talking earlier on about the boss who comes in and says hi and bye, and it's those kind of, and they can be very brief exchanges or interactions, but when there's warm, positive eye contact, when somebody conveys they're pleased to see you, when we physically just moving.
Yeah.
You know, so this is why, like, sitting at a desk all day in the workplace or in school is really not good for dopamine, because we need to move to generate it. Which is why, you know, you've seen younger children in the playground, pre-adolescence, when they're feeling a bit flat. You know, they kind of get released for playtime and they're just charging off because their brains are just going, I haven't had any dopamine because I've just been sitting here listening and my body's been still and I just need the dopamine hit.
I'm putting pieces to the puzzle in my head. Every time I'm with you, Jo, you just enlighten me more. And it's like going back to creative mentoring. I know that's why it's so successful with the young people, because it creates the creativity, the activities that they do create that dopamine that allows them to learn, if that makes sense. It encourages them and inspires them to want to learn. And then the change in the young person after creative mentoring, say a block of 24 hours, and beforehand they may not be going to school at all, they may hate school. But then after that you see that they become like a different person, a different student. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, that's the dopamine.
And there's two crucial things that I should add about dopamine here. Is one, it speeds up neural connectivity, synaptic connectivity. So basically dopamine means you get a better learner.
Right.
All the more reason for more movement in, not just in school, in life. But you know, this idea of sitting at desks or sitting at tables will never give you the most effective learner because it's too static. If you move and have social interaction and have creativity and all of that kind of thing embedded, you will get a better learner.
Right.
And it takes me back to an experience I had in Leicester, actually, a conference at the Space Centre, where it was a cultural education conference, and a head teacher got up to kind of give his keynote speech about the power of creativity in learning, and said, I spoke like something supernatural was happening, and said, I don't know what it is that we're doing, but we've started to do half an hour of art at the beginning of every day, and our numeracy levels and our literacy levels have gone up. And, you know, and I took the stage a bit later on in the day, and it was like, that's bang on the right approach, but there's nothing mysterious about it. You're just sorting brain chemistry out at the beginning of the day.
And how important that is at the beginning of the day, because you know what it is, as much as you may love school, all kids, I don't know all kids, I'll say my kids don't have a problem with school, but they have a problem with getting up in the mornings and dragging themselves to school. So I imagine the first hour in school is like, oh, why am I here? Whereas if they used to do art, imagine in homeroom or whatever it is, they do art for half an hour. It sets you up right. It's like jogging first thing in the morning. Do you get what I mean?
Or even like there's things that can be much less kind of resource heavy, walking to school or the workplace or wherever, kind of putting physical activity. How does everybody, whether it's in school or the workplace, say hello to each other? What's the way of greeting? Because warm, positive eye contact, being recognised, being acknowledged, being spoken to by your name gives you a dopamine hit. So even if you don't have the resource to do, like, let's start creative activity at the beginning of every day, let's have a 5-minute ritual where we say hello to each other, where we exchange some kind of welcome, because that probably won't give you as much dopamine as half an hour of creativity, but it will give you some kind of dopamine. And recognising that the beginning of the day, whether we are children in school, whether we're parents of children in school, or whether we're just in the workplace, actually getting to wherever you're getting can be a very stressful part of the day. So actually what we end up with is lots of adrenaline and potentially cortisol, and they are our stressor hormones. And that kind of brings me on to my second point about dopamine, which is dopamine and other hormones like serotonin, which is our calming hormone, and oxytocin, which is our bonding, connecting hormone, all buffer the impact of stress hormones.
Okay.
So if we're feeling highly stressed, the chances are, whether we are right to be stressed or not, whether there is a genuine stressor, the body and the brain generate stressor hormones according to its perception, not on reality. So if there is stress in the environment, the brain has got too much adrenaline and cortisol, and that actually slows down neural connectivity, i.e. it stops learning, it stops productivity. And so if you put any kind of activity into stimulate the brain basically through a dopamine, serotonin or oxytocin inducing activity, it will help to sluice the stressor hormones out of the system. And coming back to adolescence, sorry, I'll shut up and let you say
No. Really interesting.
A lot of the ways that we respond to children and young people in high stress situations is to put them in higher stress situations, i.e. you've been bad, you've been naughty, you go to exclusion, or you go on the red traffic light. And I'm not saying that those issues don't need dealing with, but you will never move into a solution by putting more stress into a system, a nervous system, that is already primed for fight, flight, freeze.
So do you have any tips to get around that scenario that you just spoke about in terms of adding more stress to a high stress situation already? So relationship-based approaches every time. Okay.
If I was going to get it down to kind of 3 words,
Right.
rather than the punitive approaches, the restorative approaches, which is I don't necessarily condone what you're doing, or I don't necessarily condone what your behaviour is, but and I don't accept that, but I still accept you as a person.
Yeah.
And I still see you as a person, and even if your behaviour needs to change, your behaviour is not you.
Yeah.
That's outside of you. So, and also acknowledging that the person is in distress. You know, so and obviously, if some like a kid is throwing a chair, for example, you can't gently go in and say, I see you're feeling stressed out, you know, as you're probably going to get another chair thrown right at you. But acknowledging that this comes from a place of distress and difficulty.
Yeah.
Because very often the solution isn't in solving the problem, it's telling the person you're seen and I'm with you, and you're not on your own in whatever you're going through, and I'm not against you. Because that, you know, I think that's a danger in life, full stop, is when we're struggling, just thinking of that kind of typical secondary school experience is I've got a high level of distress and you're going to isolation. Nobody wants you here.
Yeah.
You know, and actually that's terrifying. For a nervous system, it may not be cognitively recognised, but that's where at a point where I actually need connection to feel safe. And remember, that's what when the baby arrives in the world as brand new and they cry out, that's what they're seeking. Connection. I don't feel safe until I'm connected, and that never leaves us, you know. So how does that adolescent feel connected, even if it's like you need to be removed from this situation, but you are going to go to somebody who is going to hold the space for you or make you feel safe?
I think you're so right with that. I think you're so right. Like, you know what it is? I'm just thinking back to when I was at school, the teachers that I respected were the teachers that would... If I did something wrong, I was told off for what I did wrong, but the behaviour wasn't me.
Yes.
And sometimes it was hard to manage that because they would still be nice with me in the class and whatever, but I've got a detention after the class still. Yeah. But it's nothing personal against you, it's just the process we have to go through because of what's happened. And it highlights how I am as a dad, because that's what it is. Sometimes it's like, it seems harsh sometimes where it's like, you can't play with your Lego right now because you've done this. But I do love you. Do you get that? It's not in those words, but I'll still show the love. Come, let's watch this. Or give a cuddle. Or do you get what I mean? You know, like it isn't, the behaviour isn't changing the way I feel about you as a person or an individual.
And you don't sever the connection.
It's not a case of you've done that, so I don't like you. Do you get what I mean? It's not that. So
well, that's when a child starts to embody shame.
Yeah.
And that's probably a whole different. That's a whole different podcast, probably. But the power of shame is absolutely potent, and it's lifelong. And that's the difference between kind of shame and guilt. For example, guilt is feeling bad about the act. You know, I've done something bad. Shame is I am bad. And that's what we must absolutely avoid under all circumstances. It is giving any person, you know, the sense of I am bad.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. This has been so interesting. Like I'm here thinking, wow. What I wanted to talk about was learning. So I've got teens learn quickly and can problem solve almost as well as adults when they're calm. So this is more of something with regards to people that are working with the young person. So I think we've kind of touched on this with the topics we've spoken about in terms of giving that space, understanding that dopamine enhances learning and things like that. So I think I've answered that question actually already.
Oh no, I think we can add more.
Let's go, Jo.
I think first of all, I would replace the word calm with regulated.
Right.
Because I think it's important to acknowledge, especially in the adolescent years, and especially for children and young people who have maybe experienced trauma or adversity or have got kind of distress deeply imprinted on their nervous system, is that you can be regulated but not necessarily calm, i.e. in control of your behaviours and feelings rather than being controlled by your feelings. You know, that's kind of how I describe regulation. So you might have a lot of high level of energy and things, but still be regulated. So what you're kind of looking for as a state of regulation as opposed to dysregulation is the absence of stress. But in terms of teenagers or adolescents can solve problems, and that might be need to be presented in a certain way, because if it's a right or wrong, that might it causes us all big problems, doesn't it? Am I going to get this right or wrong? That whole permission to fail piece kind of comes back in. I would say that adolescents tend to be better at problem solving than later on in adulthood when the brain has matured, simply because neural connectivity starts to slow down a little bit. So I think the ability to explore and be playful, you know, because play is hardwired into our nervous systems. It's not something we grow out of. It just manifests itself in a different way. So being able to be playful and having that kind of environment where you're heard, you know, you take the hierarchy out of the situation. I mean, I'm not saying you make spaces completely non-hierarchical, but I think I'm the adult and I know better is very limiting for an adolescent, because it makes them reticent to give their kind of... and they are so gifted and skilled in so many ways, simply because the brain is working so rapidly. It's making connections faster and more efficiently than it ever will again in life. So I think there's something massive to be said for giving adolescents, bear in mind we're in adolescent territory 25 plus, the opportunity to explore and experiment and think of different ways to approach a solution that we, as a mature brain that isn't working so efficiently and is a bit more rigid and structured in its kind of neural architecture, may not think of. So I think just offering that space, even if they can't come up with the solution or a solution, for one, there's a huge amount of value in, I think, just saying, your brain is probably better at this than mine. You know, let's at least give it a shot.
Definitely.
And also, as our mature, I know better brains, actually being able to recognise that I may know better, but I can't necessarily do better or process better or think better, because my brain isn't working as efficiently or in the ways that yours
100%, and that's like anybody working with young people, that's something to bear in mind, I think, because there may be tasks that you underestimate them just because of age. Do you know what I mean?
And because they make, in quote, you know, I'm kind of saying this loosely, but because they make stupid decisions elsewhere, that it means that they are stupid and they can't make good decisions. Yeah. They may not be able to make good decisions about that particular element of life because that particular part of their brain that processes that particular decision has dismantled a bit. But we have to bear in mind the reason it's dismantled is to allow that new growth to take place.
The under construction part.
Yeah, it's under construction, but it is also incredibly receptive. You know, because it's under construction. Definitely. It's like a sponge, that part of the brain.
Yeah.
So often in kind of thinking about those children, for example, who in earlier childhood have maybe experienced a huge amount of psychological damage, adolescence is often referred to as a second window of opportunity because it is so receptive to positive experiences that goes in that you can kind of rewrite the story of what happens for that young person and the adult that they become because of the experiences that they have during adolescence.
Definitely. And as an adolescent, there's a belief that you can do anything. Like within yourself, you feel like for example, when I was younger as a teenager, I might not have been doing things, but I believed I could do things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you can feel
so it's like, I felt like I could do something, but I just didn't know what I was supposed to be doing, if that makes sense.
Can I ask because for me, I feel like I got depression when I was around like 12, 13, well, diagnosed around 12, 13. Where does sort of depression, anxiety, and mental health needs fit into that, and how does that impact going into adolescence? Does that change anything when you're looking at the development of someone that's maybe not been through maybe traumatic experiences compared to someone that's already maybe going through something in their mental health, and does that shift how the development happens?
Well, I certainly think that the more healthy experiences a young brain has had earlier in life, the better they're going to weather the storm of adolescence. As a general rule, that's not exclusively true. But actually all adolescent brains, simply because of what's happening to them neurologically and biochemically, become more vulnerable to conditions like anxiety and depression. And I say that I'm not talking about diagnostics, depressive disorders and anxiety disorders, although of course they exist and there is a very high prevalence of those diagnoses during adolescence. But like we were talking about earlier, the reward centre that sits in the higher part of the brain and kind of generates lots of dopamine is much less active during adolescence, which is why we get this feeling of being flat. Added to that, there is a massive change in the circadian rhythm, which is the kind of scientific name for body clock, in that melatonin, which is a hormone that makes us feel sleepy, comes in much later at night and it goes out much later. And the adolescent, because pruning takes place generally, that process of pruning that I spoke about takes place generally during sleep. So in the same ways that infants from birth to 2 need much more sleep than a middle child, adolescents need on average 1 to 2 hours more sleep than an average. And this is why they often get a bad rap for being called lazy. But actually the brain needs more sleep because it's doing more pruning and the melatonin comes in. So this is another thing for whether you're working with children or you've got young people in your workforce, the adolescent brain is at its most productive and efficient at 4:00 in the afternoon. Okay. Because that is the equivalent of our 11 o'clock in the morning. It's about 5 hours behind. But when we're thinking about, we've all, you especially because you'll have known sleep deprivation, you've got young children, accumulative sleep deprivation is catastrophic for mental health. You know?
100%.
Yeah.
So if you think about the numbers of children, I'm going back to the secondary curriculum again, a lot of children are in the classroom learning at 8:30 in the morning.
And they're not they're not ready till...
Their brains are not on until midday. Well, half of them are finishing by 2:30 in the afternoon. And at 4:00 is peak learning
and they're ready,
time. So just to answer your question, Connor, I think we have to kind of factor in that kind of what's sleep doing, especially when so many of them are kind of gaming very, very late into the night, and that puts a huge amount of adrenaline into the system, and that has a very negative kind of correlation with anxiety. So I think, just in answer to your question, actually what you might do about this to support young people, obviously young people need much better mental health support via CAMHS and things like that. There's a massive gap. We're well aware of that. But what I would like to see kind of the world over is pre-adolescence, so where my son is now, for example, 9 or 10, being taught about what happens in their brains, you know, because they're not going to be necessarily that engaged with it by the time they get to adolescence. They need to know it as they go into adolescence. So they're geared up for, actually, what do I call these feelings and what's causing it and what actually might be happening in my brain and body that makes this... Because I remember in adolescence, I felt like a fish out of water, you know, and trying so hard to put on this facade of, I'm all right, I'm normal, I'm just fitting in with everyone else. Unaware that everybody else felt like a fish out of water, but I also wasn't very aware of feeling like a fish out of water at the time because I didn't have any self-awareness. Because that's a prefrontal cortex executive. You know, so actually these skills, it's a huge bugbearer of mine that my son in primary school gets 2 hours a week of physical education and he gets PSHE. That's tiny. It's tiny compared to, you know, we don't kind of wait for children to become overweight or become unfit before we say there's a physical health need. We don't wait for them to get cavities before we say there's a dental health need. But we generally tend to wait until young people are in a state of emotional or psychological distress before we say there's a mental health need. We have mental health needs from the day we are born, and they are as important, in fact I would say more important, because they are they're more important than our physical health needs and our dental health needs. And I say that they're more important because so many poor physical health conditions are underpinned by poor psychological well-being. Like you were saying earlier on, your experience of being in the workplace is that because your psychological and emotional needs weren't being met, you stopped playing football, you stopped doing the things that matter to you. So you need to be in a good emotional place to take good care of your body, for example, to make sure you eat a healthy diet. How many of us turn to junk food because we're having a really bad day? You know? So, and this is again, it's time for another podcast, I suppose, but that relationship between physical health and emotional health or mental health, we talk about it as though they're two separate worlds, and they're not, because our physical health is all a process of decision making. The decisions that we make for ourselves. So we have to have a healthy process of decision making, and that means having good brain health. It means having the opportunity for decision making. It means that our environment and the people in our environment are reinforcing our position as somebody who has decision making capacity. So we identify as a decision maker and a source of positive influence in our own lives. I.e., if there's something I don't like, I can change it. And again, that opens up a whole discussion that we probably don't have time for, which is about when we overpower young people and say, I make the rules, and if you don't do this, this is what happens. You have no power, you have no voice. Because what that starts to, how that starts to embody itself is exactly how you described earlier on, which is I become lethargic and unmotivated and don't feel like I actually have a source of agency. Life is happening to me, I don't make life happen to me.
Yeah, I think just one more thing I want to pick up on with you saying that it should be taught before you get to adolescence so you understand what's happening. And to pick up on what you said, Levi, earlier about when you've attended Jo's sessions and how things have started clicking, you've learned more. When I joined TMC and I was, again, going through the training process and attending your sessions, things started to click for me that I didn't ever understand about my own brain. And then at first there was a bit of a dip for me because I was like, okay, what I'm up against is my own brain in a way. That's really weird. How am I going to go against that? But then actually understanding what it was that's going on, I went, oh no, that actually creates a much clearer path of, I understand why I've done this and I understand why I go about things this way, and going, actually, this is how I can start to change those things. So yeah, I do think it's huge, like you say, to actually have that understanding going in, and I think I and so many people I know would have benefited from that massively.
100%, it's empowering as well.
Even the brains that all three of us have at the end of this conversation are not going to be the same brains that we started with.
Yep.
Because we're looking at 2 million neural connections being made potentially every single second while we're processing this, especially because it's content rich and it's stimulating and it's making us think, and we're drawing on memories and things like that. So our brains are massively busy. And imagine if we empowered every young person from being really, really young with, I get the power to shape my own brain.
Yeah, and I think it's coming together. Like, I'm seeing the science behind it. So I'm thinking, where you're saying our brains won't be the same, and we're learning because of the dopamine effect, because it's engaging. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so
it's rewarding. It's like, yes, this is interesting. I want to know more.
Do you get what I mean? I feel like I'm stumbling onto a secret of life. Do you get what I mean? And I think,
and it's also not just me sitting here telling you. It's engaging. It's two-way. It's transactional.
Yeah, that's it. So I think, and I bring it back to the creative mentoring side. This is creative mentoring.
Yeah.
Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
It's that conversation and dialogue and what are we going to do today? Well, let's just go with the flow of it.
Yeah.
Let's see where we're going. And, do you know what I mean? So I think
some kind of journey of discovery.
That's it. And it's the dopamine that's blown me away because I've heard it so many times before, but I'm obviously not paid attention to it like that. But after hearing what you've told us today and then adding dopamine in there, it's like, oh, okay. That's kind of like the ignition. Do you get what I mean? That's the ignition to the engine, and then things can start, and I'm able to see where, like come back to creative mentoring, I'm able to see how the dopamine effect there enables the young person to progress, and you can actually see the improvement. So
and just knowing how to get your own dopamine levels up. I remember I spoke to I was doing more parent work at the time around COVID, and hearing a lot about adolescents who were basically locking themselves in a dark room and only coming out to get a plate of food and going back in again. And that was, a real depletion of dopamine. And now I'm not saying that knowing how to generate dopamine means you will, because unfortunately the kind of double-edged sword of depression is often you don't want to do the thing to get you out of it.
Hugely.
But if you're able to just know that actually if I just go and step outside for minutes, or I turn this flipping device off and give my brain something else to think about, or I make a phone call instead of just using my thumbs and pressing this, and just like in 5 minutes or less seconds, I can actually change my brain chemistry.
100%. Thank you so much, Jo. I really appreciate it, because I think today's format was quite different to how we normally do podcasts. I think this will be a nice aid for anybody working with young people, just for a few brief tips and the reason why certain things are how they are. Do you get what I mean? So
it's so much to be said for not taking it personally as well, because I know like adolescents are kind of known for being uncaring and kind of grunting at people. And very often they just don't know how they come across, because they don't have the social kind of competencies to understand how that makes another person feel.
Absolutely.
So I guess my closing statement really is to what we see on the exterior of an adolescent really belies the magic that's happening inside, and to not just be led with that. It can make them difficult to have conversations with when you're kind of trying to, it can be a bit like pulling teeth, you're trying to extract this, but to just keep persevering, and more than anything, just keep building the relationship
100%.
and keeping connected, because that's what kind of unlocks the magic.
And that's it. And like my takeaway from it is, and it kind of, I know this already, but it's reinforced it, is, like you said, don't take it personally, and you can't view the young person as an adult, because they're not an adult.
They're not.
Do you get what I mean?
What's happening to their body is very, very different than what's going on in their heads.
You made a point earlier on about how the body grows, and you see that, but the brain grows too, but that's something that we don't see. And it's kind of like, we lead with our eyes a lot of the time. Sometimes you've got to feel. We'll go into our closing question. I've got two, actually. We did something on the last podcast that I thought was really good and quirky. I want to do it again. So the first one is, I want to ask you is, if you could give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Okay. I think the advice that I'd go for is that no matter what you do, there are going to be people that don't like you. So do what you actually want to do, so then you at least like yourself. And then the people that stick around for that are the people that are worthwhile.
Yeah, I like that. That's similar to like a Pogba quote. He said, 1 week they hate me, the next week they love me. I get paid both weeks.
There is actually a book that is rising in popularity, and I can't bring the author to mind, but it's called The Courage to be Disliked. Maybe we should put that on every adolescent's reading list.
Thank you for that.
It's going to go on mine.
Appreciate that. Have you got one, Joe?
I'm trying to think of something different now, but it's probably kind of along the same lines. And I think it's more about what I would have liked is the advice to stand up for myself peacefully.
Okay.
Because when I like most adolescents, were kind of very attached to my friendship group, and that sense of belonging. That also included, I don't want to say people who were inappropriate, but behaviours that were inappropriate, that weren't healthy, you know. Yeah. And to be able to say, that isn't fair, or don't treat me like that, or don't talk to me like that, or don't behave towards me like that. But I didn't have the skills to be able to say that without fearing that there would be conflict or the end of the friendship. That somehow mattered hugely to me, even though there was all this kind of discord that was happening in it. So I think the advice would have actually been a skill, which is how you actually protect your boundaries and your rights in a kind of a diplomatic, peaceful kind of way.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's similar to what I want to say. There was an issue that was in the newspaper the other day with some young people. I'm not going to go into it, but it made me think, if I could tell my younger self something, and it's similar to what you were saying about being in a group or drawn to the crowd, it will be, if you can walk away from something, walk away. Do you know what I mean? Because I think sometimes I was easily led as a young person, and I think sometimes we get led into scenarios that we're not ready for and that we shouldn't be in, but it's just a case of you follow the crowd. So if you get a chance to walk away, walk away.
Yeah,
And
I'm just sorry to interject there, Levi, but it comes back to our zebra.
Yeah.
Are you a safer zebra if you are on your own and visible, or are you safer if you are just disappear into the crowd? And that's what peer pressure does to adolescents.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a good analogy.
I think that also, you know, if you express that to an adolescent in those terms or not, I think it reminds us of how much courage it can actually take to break away.
100%. 100%.
We make it sound so easy. Just walk away.
Yeah, we do.
It's not
It's
that
really
easy.
not.
The
It's really not.
vulnerability that comes with the possible rejection of walking away.
And the last thing you want to be is rejected.
Totally.
Last thing.
Totally. Because it activates that brain stress response. If I'm rejected, I'm in danger.
The final thing I wanted to ask is a bit quirky, it's a bit lighthearted, is eco confessions. What is your eco confession? So last week we had Samantha, I don't think she'll mind me sharing. Her eco confession was she started off a flexitarian, but now she started eating meat full time. I'm sorry, I just gave you a confession away, but they'll hear it on the podcast anyway. My eco confession for today is, my last eco confession, I'm not going to do this all the time because then I'm going to look like I'm not really eco-friendly, and I am eco-friendly, is drinking plastic bottles, getting plastic bottles all the time. I buy the crates of 12 and I drink them.
Shame
And
on you.
that was mine for last week. And mine for this time is getting plastic bags, buying a new plastic bag every time I go to the supermarket. I should just take a plastic bag from home that I've already got, but I don't, so.
Well, I feel like an eco-warrior now because I always, I recycle all of my soft plastics, but I always have carrier bags in the back of my car. And I'm very averse to kind of plastic bottles, but I guess my eco-confession is that I like travelling too much, and so I, bear in mind that, flying is not great for the environment. That in the last, I flew twice in April and I flew twice in July.
Okay,
so
so
probably doing a few too many air miles.
Thank you for that, Joe. Appreciate that. Have you got one, Connor?
Mine has got to be the fact that, so I moved in with my dad recently and he doesn't have a recycling bin.
Right.
But now it's just made me really lazy in just going, all the rubbish can go in one bag, one bin, nice and easy. And yeah, there's a few things that I probably could be like, I can just find a recycling bin somewhere, or like pile it up and then go to a plant somewhere.
Now, you've got to rectify that.
Yeah, it's not healthy.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Thank you for being guests on today's podcast. You've been listening to the Mighty Voices podcast. My name's Levi Knight, Youth Programme Coordinator. And until next time, bye for now.